This is a brief summary of how our time-cross remote viewers working at the Farsight Institute did in predicting the news events for January 2017, all based on remote viewing, done and published on YouTube for all to see in December 2016. Now, for those of you who are new to watching this monthly project that we began back in May 2016, we use a news analysis table that is updated daily on our website to isolate the major news events for each month. And our expectation is to predict those major news events, plus some other important news events that are not heavily covered by our featured news outlets, but which are covered in alternative news outlets. Now, we had 2 remote viewers working in December on the Time Cross January project, Dick Allgaier and Aziz Brown. Starting with Dick Allgaier, he reported essentially 4 major events in advance of the events happening. So first he reported a landmass falling away in the manner of an earthquake, exposing a cliff, possibly underwater, not far from a shoreline, and causing a noticeable tsunami. He did not report any damage from the tsunami. Now, as it turned out, a 7.3 magnitude earthquake did hit the Philippines on the 10th of January near the island of Jolo. And this event was not reported on the main pages of any of our featured news outlets, CNN, the New York Times, and the BBC, but it was covered in a number of other mainstream news outlets. Now, second, Dick Allgaier reported that a famous female would die of natural causes at an old age, and in fact, the months of December 2016 and January 2017 were indeed months where famous females died of old age. Mary Tyler Moore died on the 25th of January 2017, and Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher, her daughter, died in late December 2016. I think the best way to discuss this is that this was a period where 3 famous females died at an old age and of natural causes, and indeed Dick Allgaier did predict such a thing would appear in the news of that time. Third, Dick Allgaier reported that January would be a major month of demonstrations and public confrontations. He described a number of situations in which crowds of people interacted with police. Fences separated groups of people, some peaceful protests and some violent protests, but with lots of people involved. He described tear gas being used and people running around while adapting to an evolving situation. He described no shooting or killing. Well, as it turned out, January was a month of serious clashes between authorities and masses of people, especially near a fence. The events of January were particularly complicated in this regard. First, on January 1st in 2017, 1,100 African migrants stormed the Spanish enclave of Ceuta in an attempt to break into the enclave and gain entry into Spain. Ceuta is on the African side of the Strait of Gibraltar, and there is a large and fortified fence, and the violent attempt to gain entry into the enclave was quite remarkable. It was reported by the BBC, one of our featured news outlets, and a significant number of alternative outlets. But in terms of other protests, there was also the inauguration stuff in the United States. Now, scheduled events are not allowed in our Time Cross project since they are predictable. But some of the demonstrations that occurred during and especially the day after the inauguration were totally unscheduled, and they were huge, apparently much larger than the crowds involved in the inauguration itself. There were confrontations with the police, tear gas, people running, some violence, plus some peaceful protests, the works. Moreover, there was no shooting, just as Dick Allgaier predicted. Also of note, on the 28th of January, United States President Donald Trump signed an executive order banning Muslims from 7 majority Muslim countries from entering the United States. And all sorts of major public protests immediately began to emerge worldwide. That was indeed the event that scored the highest number of links in our news analysis table for the month of January 2017. So, while it may not be clear exactly which protest Dick Allgaier was reporting when he made his predictions, it is nonetheless clear that January was a month of diverse and major public protests, and Dick got that correct. Now finally, Dick Algeier reported that Queen Elizabeth would be found wandering around late at night in what appeared to be Buckingham Palace, possibly suffering from some level of dementia, such as Alzheimer's. But as it turns out, Queen Elizabeth was nearly shot by a palace guard while wandering around Buckingham Palace at 3 a.m. Now, this story was not immediately covered by our featured news outlets, but it was eventually picked up by the international edition of CNN. The incident was widely reported elsewhere, however, and there was no reporting as to whether the Queen may or may not be suffering from some form of dementia. So that element remains unverified. Now, I really should point out that such a story has never before been reported about the Queen. So, for those who still question the reality of remote viewing, reporting this event in advance of it happening on this particular month is really quite notable. Now, with respect to the remote viewing reports by Aziz Brown for January 2017, he predicted two major events. Now, the first was a major storm system that would hit a developed area with urban and other environments. It was a northern hemisphere area since it was quite cold, requiring a jacket if one is outdoors. There was snow and rain, depending on the location, but no significant damage to structures. Now, I must admit that when I first saw this remote viewing session, I wondered why a rain and snow weather system would be major news anywhere, especially when there was no major damage, but lots of rain and snow. But as it turns out, the west coast of the United States, especially California, experienced record levels of precipitation, essentially erasing in 1 month the effects of one of the most devastating 6-year droughts in modern West Coast history. There was flooding, record snowpacks, as well as a state of emergency in over 20 towns and counties. It was huge news on the west coast of the United States, but it was not covered at all on the main pages of our featured major news outlets. It was covered extensively on alternative news outlets such as the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times. Now, Aziz's second remote viewing session reported a bombing event. He reported a large plane dropping lots of bombs on a collection of subjects on the ground in a dry area not too far from a city. The group on the ground made him think of ISIS combatants, and they had a killing mindset filled with anger and hatred. They were angry at the world, but also angry on a localized area as well. The subjects were mostly men, but with some women. The men had facial hair and headgear. Well, as it turns out, the United States used B-2 bombers in a major attack to bomb an ISIS position in the desert of Libya on the 19th of January. This was a particularly notable event since it was the first combat use of these stealth B-2 bombers since 2011. This event was reported in most of our featured news outlets. For both news events reported by Aziz Brown, the weather and the bombing, his descriptions of the events very closely matched what actually happened on the ground and in the air. Another way to look at the significance of the remote viewing reporting is that these reports by Aziz predicted that January would be a month with significant, non-destructive, extensive precipitation in an area that would be newsworthy, and an unusual and important bombing attack, and that is what happened. Now, non-destructive weather is very rarely a main news item, but in January 2017, due to its unusual impact and nature, it was. Now, similarly, a single aerial bombing in the Middle East is not normally a main news item either, but due to the rare nature of the attack using stealth B-2 bombers, it was in January. Well, I am glad that thousands of people are watching our ongoing Time Cross project. You will all be glad to hear that we are about to release a new mysteries project at Farsight. Now, this is the one you have been waiting for. Roswell, the Farsight UFO project of the century. We have begun to roll out the trailers for this project, and it will be released during the 3rd week of February 2017, just days away, and it will be available on Vimeo to rent or purchase, as with many of our mysteries projects. Now, I do want to tell you that this major release should be watched sitting down. We tell you what happened. We describe something about where they came from. And we give you insight into who they were. As always, all Farsight remote viewing work is done under totally blind conditions, with no communication between any of the remote viewers. It is also good to remember that when you watch our Mysteries projects, you are helping us at Farsight do our work, including our Time Cross project, which we offer free to the public, but which costs us a few $1,000s to do each month. We have no other significant source of income to pay the bills, so you really help us when you follow and watch our activities and research. And honestly, I really think you will want to see Roswell. And again, sitting down, holding on to your seat. And do remember to watch our other Mysteries projects as well, such as the investigations into the 9/11 events, the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, the psychology of Adolf Hitler, and some amazing explorations into UFOs and extraterrestrial life. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel, Farsight Press, to keep up with the latest, which includes all of the trailers for the upcoming Roswell project as well as our science vlog. There is nothing like Farsight anywhere else on the internet. You can find information about all of our present and past activities on our website. Also on our website, you can sign up for our free email newsletter. Hey, stay ahead of the curve. Let the mainstream fade in the dust. Be there now.